She was denied her lunch at school as a punishment. She would be left isolated in a corner of the classroom while her classmates ate and laughed. All of this was called education until her father finds out, and the house of cards begins to crumble. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan awoke before the sun. Michael Anderson was already in a suit by 5:30 in the morning, checking emails on his phone as he descended the Italian marble staircase. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of his footsteps and the distant rumble of a car engine starting in the garage. James, the driver who had worked for the family for 15 years, was already at his post, punctual as always. Michael was 42 and ran a tech empire that employed over 3,000 people. His routine was mathematical: meetings from 7 to 10, business lunches, video conferences with international investors, client dinners. Everything was meticulously calculated, perfectly executed. There was no room for improvisation in the life of a man who had transformed a startup in his parents' garage into one of the most valuable companies in the American corporate app market. Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who had managed the mansion since before Michael's daughter was born, was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She was 63, with grey hair always tied in a neat bun and hands calloused from decades of work. She knew every corner of that house, every painting on the wall, every photo tucked away in the drawers. She had witnessed Michael's wedding to Helen, watched her through her pregnancy, and held little Isabella in her arms right after she was born. And she had also been there 3 years ago when Helen passed away after a sudden and severe case of pneumonia, leaving a void that no designer furniture could fill. Isabella was 8 years old and slept in her second-floor bedroom, decorated in shades of light pink and filled with storybooks she rarely read alone. The girl had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark brown hair, always styled in 2 braids that Mrs. Peterson patiently wove every morning. She was a beautiful, polite child, far too quiet for her age. At school, her teachers said she was shy, but had a talent for drawing. At home, she spent hours in her room, sketching landscapes, animals, and especially the face of the mother that was fading from her memory. On that Tuesday morning in March, Michael came down the stairs with his executive briefcase under his arm, walked past the kitchen without a glance at the prepared breakfast, grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, and left through the side door that led directly to the garage. Mrs. Peterson sighed, wiped her hands on her apron, and slowly went upstairs to wake Isabella. She found the girl already sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the sky that was beginning to lighten. "Good morning, my little flower," the housekeeper said in the soft voice she reserved only for the child. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," Isabella replied, climbing out of bed and slipping on her unicorn slippers. "Your father already left for work, but he sent you a kiss," Mrs. Peterson lied for the 100th time, because she knew those small white lies were the only affection the girl received before facing the day. Isabella said nothing. She just nodded and went to the bathroom to wash her face. She had already learned that asking about her father was pointless. He was always busy, always in an important meeting, always promising that things would be different on the weekend. But the weekends would come, and Michael would be at the office or traveling to close a deal, or physically present but mentally absent, his eyes glued to his laptop screen. Dalton Prep was on the Upper West Side, a modern building with climate-controlled classrooms, state-of-the-art sports facilities, and tuition that cost more than what many American families make in a year. Isabella had been a student there since she was 4. She knew every hallway, every corner of the playground, every bench under the trees where she liked to sit alone during recess. She had a few classmates she talked to, but no deep friendships. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her and the other children, a discomfort she couldn't explain herself. It was in April, right after spring break, that the new teacher arrived. Ms. Clarissa Hayes was 36, with a degree in education from Columbia University and a specialization in educational psychology, an impeccable resume with excellent references. She had styled blonde hair, always wore elegant but discreet clothing, and knew exactly what to say in every situation. The school principal introduced her as an exceptional professional who was taking over the third-grade class after the previous teacher had to take a leave of absence for health reasons. Clarissa smiled a lot. She greeted parents at the gate, sent warm messages in the parent WhatsApp groups, posted photos of classroom activities, and organized social events. Within a few weeks, she was beloved by everyone. Parents praised her dedication, the academic coordinator highlighted her innovative methods, and the children seemed to love the art classes she conducted with such enthusiasm. Isabella caught her attention from the very first day. Clarissa noticed the girl was different from the others, quieter, more observant, with a natural talent for drawing that deserved to be nurtured. She began to praise her in class, display her work on the bulletin board, and send notes home in her school planner congratulating her on her dedication. Michael, who rarely looked at the planner, started receiving direct emails from the teacher. "Mr. Anderson, I would like to discuss Isabella's artistic development. She has extraordinary potential, and I believe we can work together to encourage it further. I'm available for a meeting at your convenience." Michael replied automatically, thanking her and saying he would schedule a time soon. But it took 3 emails and a call from the school office for him to finally show up on a Thursday afternoon between 2 meetings for a 15-minute chat with his daughter's teacher. Clarissa welcomed him into the meeting room with a warm smile, coffee already prepared, and a folder full of Isabella's drawings organized chronologically. Michael was impressed. No one had ever shown so much care for his daughter. The teacher spoke with expertise, pointed out the girl's progress, suggested extracurricular activities, and mentioned that she sensed a certain sadness in her that could be worked through with art. "She misses her mother, doesn't she?" Clarissa said with a tone of understanding that seemed genuine. Michael felt a lump in his throat. "Yes," he said simply, looking away. "Children who experience loss need a great deal of emotional support. I know you're a busy man, but Isabella needs to feel that she's not alone. I can help. I have experience with similar cases." The conversation lasted half an hour. Michael left feeling a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for knowing he was truly absent. Relief for having found someone who seemed to understand his daughter and was willing to help. He started paying more attention to Clarissa's emails, which always brought news about Isabella, always with a supportive and professional tone. It was Mrs. Peterson who first sensed that something wasn't right. She knew children. She had raised 3 of her own and helped care for 5 grandchildren. She knew how to recognize when a child was genuinely happy and when she was just being obedient. And Isabella, despite bringing home praised drawings and positive notes in her planner, seemed increasingly withdrawn. "Mr. Anderson, I need to talk to you," she said one Saturday morning when she managed to find him in the kitchen, having coffee before another day of work. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm in a hurry. Can this be quick?" "It's about the girl. She's not doing well." "What do you mean, not doing well? Her grades are great. The teacher only sends praise." "It's not about grades, Mr. Anderson. It's about her spirit. She's so sad. She doesn't laugh like she used to. She spends hours looking at Mrs. Helen's picture. She has nightmares almost every night." Michael ran a hand over his face, impatient. "Mrs. Peterson, she lost her mother. It's normal for her to still be processing the grief. The educational psychologist the school recommended said it's a phase. But Mr. Anderson, don't you see that the girl needs you? Money and a good school are important, but she needs a hug, a conversation, to feel that her father is present." "I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Peterson. I work every day to make sure she has everything. Don't you think I know I'm not the perfect father? But I'm trying." The housekeeper lowered her eyes. She knew there were limits to this conversation. She was an employee. She didn't have the right to push any further. She just nodded and went back to her chores. But the unease remained, growing day by day. Clarissa began to appear more in Michael's life. First, it was a chance meeting at the neighborhood grocery store where they exchanged a few words about Isabella. Then, an invitation for a quick coffee to discuss an art project the class was developing that needed parental support. Michael accepted, more out of politeness than interest, but ended up finding the conversation pleasant. Clarissa was intelligent, cultured, and could talk about art, literature, even technology. She was an interesting woman, different from the robotic executives he dealt with at work. "I really admire what you've built," she said during one of these meetings. "It must be difficult to balance such a demanding career with raising a daughter on your own." "It's challenging," Michael admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing on all fronts." "You're not failing, you're doing what you can. And Isabella feels that. She talks about her father with so much pride." Michael smiled, touched by her words. It had been a long time since someone had validated him that way. At work it was always about results, numbers, targets. Here with Clarissa he felt that someone saw him as a human being, not just a successful businessman. The months passed. June arrived with the school's spring fair. Clarissa organized a beautiful performance, with all the children in costume, and Isabella at the center, holding a poster she had drawn herself. Michael managed to leave work early to watch. He was moved to see his daughter on stage, even though he noticed she was more nervous than the other children. Afterward, Clarissa came to greet him, beaming. "Isabella did wonderfully. You must be so proud." "I am," he said, and it was true. It was around this time that Clarissa's invitations became more frequent. A lunch to discuss the possibility of Isabella entering a drawing competition, a dinner because she had secured a spot for the girl in a watercolor workshop. Michael, who used to turn down almost all social engagements, started accepting. He enjoyed Clarissa's company. She was easygoing, interesting, and seemed to genuinely care about Isabella, and he was tired of being alone. Mrs. Peterson watched it all with growing concern. It wasn't that she was against her employer moving on with his life. He was young, he had a right to be happy again. But there was something about Clarissa that bothered her. Maybe it was the way she looked at the house when she came to pick Michael up, assessing every detail, or the way her smile changed subtly when Isabella approached, becoming a little more mechanical, less genuine, or the fact that whenever Clarissa was around, the girl became even quieter, as if she were being constantly evaluated. The housekeeper tried to bring it up one more time, delicately. "Mr. Anderson, are you happy with Ms. Hayes?" Michael smiled. "I am, Mrs. Peterson. She's an incredible woman. Smart, dedicated. To Isabella, it's been a long time since I've felt this way." The older woman forced a smile. "I'm happy for you, sir. I just wanted to know if Isabella is also happy with this." Michael frowned. "Of course she is. Clarissa is her teacher. They have a great relationship." Mrs. Peterson wanted to say no, that Isabella didn't seem happy, that the girl shrank whenever Clarissa appeared, that there was something strange in those supposedly caring eyes. But the words died in her throat. Who was she to question her employer's choices? In September, Michael and Clarissa made their relationship official. The news spread through the school like wildfire. Some parents thought it was romantic. Others whispered that the situation was a bit strange, but no one said anything openly. Clarissa was too well-liked. Michael was too important, and besides, who were they to judge? Isabella was the last to know. Michael sat down with her on a rare Sunday afternoon and explained that he was dating Ms. Hayes and that he thought it would be good for everyone. The girl just nodded without asking any questions. Her father interpreted her silence as acceptance. Mrs. Peterson, watching from the kitchen doorway, saw what Michael couldn't. The girl's eyes were empty, resigned, as if she already knew that nothing she said would make a difference. The relationship moved quickly. By October, Clarissa was spending weekends at the mansion. In November, she started leaving clothes in the closet. In December, on Christmas Eve, Michael proposed to her at a restaurant in Soho, complete with a discreet photographer and a diamond ring that cost more than an imported car. Clarissa said yes, moved, and soon the news was on social media, generating hundreds of comments and likes. Isabella saw the couple's photo on Mrs. Peterson's phone. The housekeeper tried to gauge the girl's reaction, but she just looked, shrugged, and went back to her room. That night, Mrs. Peterson found Isabella hiding a shoebox in the back of her closet. Inside were all the photos of her mother that used to be scattered around the house, now stored away like forbidden treasures. The girl said nothing. She just closed the box, pushed it into the darkest corner of the closet, and lay down on the bed with her back to the door. And so, while Michael planned a future he believed was better for everyone, Isabella silently prepared for what was to come. feeling the world around her changing in a way she couldn't control, and that no one seemed willing to listen to her fears. The wedding took place in February, on a sunny Saturday in a chapel on Park Avenue, an intimate ceremony with only 50 guests. Clarissa wore a simple but elegant white dress, a bouquet of white lilies in her hands, a perfect smile on her face. Michael was impeccable in a navy blue Italian suit, a new wedding band gleaming on his finger, his eyes misty with emotion as he said "I do" before the justice of the peace. Isabella stood beside them in a light pink dress that perfectly matched the decor, a small crown of flowers in her hair, holding a small basket of rose petals that she was supposed to have thrown during the ceremony, but which remained untouched in her trembling hands. The wedding photos appeared on 2 luxury event blogs and on the guests' social media feeds. Michael Anderson, the tech billionaire, finally finds happiness with the beautiful educator Clarissa Hayes. The romantic headline scrolled across phone screens all over New York City, while Isabella that same night cried softly into her pillow, clutching the only portrait of her mother she had managed to hide from the major redecorating blitz Clarissa had launched the week before the wedding. Mrs. Peterson served dinner at the small reception in the mansion, handling the details with her usual efficiency, but her heart was heavy. She watched Isabella from a distance, noticing how the girl flinched whenever Clarissa came near, how she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, how her hands trembled slightly when her stepmother adjusted her dress for photos. The housekeeper tried one last time on the eve of the wedding to warn Michael. She was cut off before she could even finish her sentence. "Mrs. Peterson, I know you worry about Isabella, but you need to understand that Clarissa is a professional, an educator. She knows how to handle children better than any of us. The girl just needs time to adjust. It's a normal adjustment period." The words stuck in the housekeeper's throat. She just nodded and returned to the kitchen, where she cried quietly while baking the carrot cake Isabella loved so much, knowing that soon that recipe would be replaced by some more sophisticated, less loving version. The honeymoon was in Aspen, just 5 days, because Michael couldn't be away from work for long. Isabella stayed home with Mrs. Peterson, who made a point of preparing all the girls' favorite meals, taking her to the park, watching movies together, trying to somehow compensate for what was to come. When the couple returned, everything changed. Clarissa entered the mansion no longer as a guest, but as the lady of the house. In the first week, she hired a decorator to redo the main living room, the beige. Curtains Helen had chosen were replaced with charcoal grey models. The paintings of American landscapes gave way to minimalist abstractions. The comfortable sofa where Isabella used to curl up to read was swapped for an Italian designer set, beautiful, but hard as a rock. The changes were presented as improvements, modernization, good taste. Michael approved of everything, pleased to have a wife who took such good care of the house. Mrs. Peterson realized it wasn't just furniture being replaced. It was Helen's memory being erased piece by piece, room by room. The ceramic vase Helen had bought on a trip to Santa Fe disappeared. The floral pattern dinner set was donated. The china cabinet that held family heirlooms was sold. When the housekeeper dared to ask about a few pieces, Clarissa replied with a polite but firm smile, "We're building a new chapter for this family, Mrs. Peterson. We can't live in the past." Isabella watched it all in silence. She saw her last ties to her mother being removed, packed up, donated, forgotten. She once tried to ask her father about the painting her mother had made that had always hung on the dining room wall. Michael, distracted, replied that Clarissa didn't think it matched the new decor, but that she could have it in her room if she wanted. The girl ran to her room, but the painting wasn't there. She never found out where it went. The house rules also changed. Clarissa drew up a strict schedule for Isabella. Wake up at 6:30, breakfast at 7 sharp, study from 7:30 to 8, leave for school at 8:15. After school, a quick snack, homework from 4 to 6, dinner at 7, bath at 8, bed at 9. No television during the week, no sweets before meals, no mess in her room. Everything had to be always organized, clean, perfect. To Michael, this seemed like the sign of a dedicated wife, concerned with providing structure for her stepdaughter. To Isabella, it was a prison disguised as care. Every minute of her day was controlled, every move watched, every mistake pointed out with a smile that masked the criticism. If the girl took 5 extra minutes in the bath, Clarissa would knock on the door, reminding her there was a schedule to keep. If she left a pencil out of place, she would find a note on her desk. Organization is a sign of respect for those who take care of you. If she didn't finish all the food on her plate, she was told she was wasting the chef's work and disrespecting children who were starving. Mrs. Peterson tried to soften things when Clarissa wasn't around. She would leave a piece of chocolate hidden in Isabella's room, let her watch a few minutes of a cartoon, and help with homework when the girl was exhausted. But it all had to be done in secret, because Clarissa would not tolerate her rules being questioned or bent. At school, where Clarissa still taught Isabella's class, the situation worsened. Before, the teacher would praise the girl publicly, show off her drawings, and use her as an example. Now, there was a subtle but noticeable shift. Clarissa demanded more from Isabella than from the other children. If a classmate turned in a decent assignment, they received congratulations. If Isabella turned in something similar, she was told she could have done better, that she wasn't applying herself enough, that she was disappointing expectations. The other children started to notice. Some classmates whispered that Isabella was the teacher's pet, which was ironically the opposite of the truth. Others felt sorry for her but didn't know how to help. The entire class had learned that when Ms. Hayes was in a bad mood, it was best to stay quiet and not draw attention to yourself. It was in April, 2 months after the wedding, that the first physical signs began to appear. Isabella started complaining of stomach aches. At first they were isolated incidents, quickly dismissed as a passing bug, but soon they became frequent. Every morning before going to school, the girl would run to the bathroom, pale and sweating. Mrs. Peterson suggested it might be best to take her to a doctor. Michael agreed, but Clarissa intervened with her sweet professional voice. These are typical anxiety symptoms in children going through changes. I've seen it dozens of times. What Isabella needs is routine and firmness, not coddling. If we start giving in every time she complains about something, we'll create a manipulative child. Michael, who knew nothing about child development and trusted his wife implicitly, accepted the explanation. Isabella continued to go to school even when she was in pain, even when she could barely concentrate in class, even when she came home exhausted, and went straight to bed without dinner. The nights became a torment. Isabella would wake up several times, calling for her mother, asking for water, crying softly. Clarissa, sleeping in the room next to Michael's, heard everything but didn't move. She would tell her husband in the morning that the girl was testing boundaries, that she needed to learn to sleep on her own, that it was part of growing up. Michael, exhausted from so many meetings and trips, would end up agreeing. It was easier to trust the judgment of someone who seemed to know what she was doing. Mrs. Peterson, however, couldn't close her eyes to what she was seeing. The girl was losing weight. Her clothes were getting loose. The color was draining from her face. Her eyes had deep, dark circles. Isabella, who once loved to draw, barely touched her colored pencils. She spent her free time just staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts an 8-year-old shouldn't have. The housekeeper scheduled a serious talk with Michael one evening when he arrived home early, a rare occurrence. She waited for him to finish dinner, waited for Clarissa to go upstairs, and then stood at the door of his office where he was reviewing spreadsheets. "Mr. Anderson, I need you to listen to me carefully. Isabella is not well, and it's not just a phase. She's wasting away. She doesn't eat right, she doesn't sleep right, she doesn't play anymore. That little girl is suffering and you're not seeing it." Michael took off his glasses, rubbing his tired face. "Mrs. Peterson, I know you're attached to Isabella, but Clarissa is a trained, experienced professional. She's applying modern educational methods that may seem strict but are effective. The girl needs discipline, clear boundaries. That is love, even if it doesn't look like it. That's not love, Mr. Anderson. That's control. The girl is scared. She flinches when Clarissa comes near her. She trembles when she goes to school. This isn't normal." Michael's tone changed, grew cold. "You are overstepping your bounds, Mrs. Peterson. Clarissa is my wife and Isabella's stepmother. I will not have you questioning the way she cares for my daughter. If you are not happy working here, I can understand that." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Mrs. Peterson felt tears burn in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. She nodded, apologized for the intrusion, and left the office with a broken heart. She knew she had two choices: accept it silently or risk losing her job, and worse, losing the chance to be there to support Isabella when she needed it most. She chose to stay. But the guilt ate away at her. The following months were a downward spiral disguised as normalcy. To an outsider, everything seemed perfect. The Anderson family posted smiling photos on social media. Michael and Clarissa appeared together at charity events, corporate dinners and school functions. Isabella was always by their side, impeccably dressed, her hair neat, a forced smile on her face. The image of the happy family was sold and bought without question. But inside the mansion, the reality was different. Clarissa intensified her control. She started checking Isabella's backpack every day, looking for notes, drawings, anything she considered inappropriate. She once found a piece of paper where the girl had written, "I wish Mommy were here." Clarissa kept the paper, showing it to Michael, as proof that Isabella was clinging too much to the past and needed psychological help to move on. Michael, concerned, hired a psychologist. Clarissa made sure to choose the professional, a college friend who shared her line of thinking. Children need structure, limits, and discipline. The therapy sessions became another obligation in Isabella's already suffocating routine. The psychologist, influenced by Clarissa's account, focused on making the girl accept the new family structure, stop living in grief, and be grateful for everything she had. Isabella quickly learned that telling the truth was useless. When she tried to tell the psychologist she was afraid of her stepmother, the professional replied that it was natural resistance and that she needed to try harder to accept the love Clarissa was offering. The girl never brought it up again. She started saying what she knew they wanted to hear. Yes, she was adjusting. Yes, her stepmother was nice. Yes, everything was fine. At school, the situation reached a critical point one morning in June. It was the day for group project presentations, and Isabella, along with 3 classmates, had to present a project on Amazon rainforest animals. The girl had spent days drawing illustrations for the poster, one of the few things she could still do with some pleasure. But when it was time to present, she got nervous and stammered while reading her part. She forgot a sentence, started over, her hands trembling as she held the paper. Clarissa, at the front of the room, watched with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When Isabella finished, the teacher didn't praise her. She just said, in front of the whole class, "It seems someone didn't prepare properly. Isabella, I need you to take your responsibilities more seriously. You may return to your seat." The girl sat down, her face burning with shame. The other groups presented, and everyone received congratulations, applause, and praise. Isabella received silence. At snack time, she sat alone, in a corner of the playground, unable to eat the sandwich Mrs. Peterson had so lovingly prepared. One of the cafeteria workers, Ms. Jackson, a 50-year-old black woman who had worked there for a decade, noticed. She approached the girl and sat down beside her. "What's wrong, little one? Why aren't you eating?" Isabella looked up at her with teary eyes. "I'm not hungry, Ms. Jackson." The woman didn't press, but she kept watching. In the following days, she noticed a pattern. Isabella rarely ate her full snack. She threw half of it away, hid parts in her napkin, and spent more time pushing the food around than eating it. Ms. Jackson mentioned it to other staff members. They all agreed something strange was going on, but no one knew exactly what. After all, Ms. Hayes was so dedicated, so present. How could there be a problem? It was on a cold, rainy afternoon in July that Mrs. Peterson found something that chilled her to the bone. She was tidying Isabella's room, changing the sheets, when she saw a notebook hidden under the mattress. Normally, she respected the girl's privacy, but something compelled her to look. She opened the notebook and found pages and pages of handwritten notes in an adult's handwriting, a handwriting she immediately recognized as Clarissa's. "You need to be better. You can't disappoint your father. If you tell anyone anything, your father will be very sad, and it will be your fault." Eat everything on your plate. Children who waste food don't deserve to have it. Stop crying, you're too old for that. Your mother isn't coming back, so you'd better accept it. There were dozens of notes, some with twisted motivational phrases, others with veiled threats, all written in a tone that mixed false affection with absolute control. Mrs. Peterson sat on the bed, holding the notebook with trembling hands, feeling nausea rise in her throat. This wasn't education. This was emotional abuse, systematic, cruel, hidden behind a facade of professionalism. She had to show this to Michael. She had to make him see. She went downstairs with the notebook under her arm, determined. But when she reached the living room, she found Clarissa sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, that serene smile on her face. The stepmother looked up, saw the notebook in the housekeeper's hands, and her smile tensed by a millimeter. "What's that? Mrs. Peterson?" The housekeeper hesitated. It was just her and Clarissa there. Michael wouldn't be home before 9. Isabella was in her room. If she showed her the notebook now, Clarissa would have time to come up with an excuse, to turn the situation around, to make it seem like Mrs. Peterson was making things up. And worse, she could take it out on the girl later, blaming her for keeping the notes. "It's just one of Isabella's notebooks that needs a new cover," she lied, forcing a smile. Clarissa studied her for a long moment, like a predator sizing up its prey. Then she nodded and went back to her phone. Mrs. Peterson went back upstairs and hid the notebook in the back of her own closet, where Clarissa would never look. She would wait for the right moment. She had to be strategic. She had to ensure that when she showed it to him, Michael would have no way to deny, deflect, or ignore it. But that right moment seemed further and further away, as Isabella faded a little more each day, trapped in a tightening web of silent control. August arrived, bringing an unseasonable chill to New York City. The mornings dawned shrouded in fog. The sky remained grey for days on end, and a dampness seeped into the bones. Isabella was waking up earlier and earlier, startled by nightmares she couldn't explain. She spent the pre-dawn hours staring at the ceiling, listening to Clarissa's footsteps in the hallway. The creak of doors opening and closing, that constant presence that made her feel watched, even when she was alone. Her physical symptoms intensified. The stomach pains were now a daily occurrence, accompanied by morning nausea that made her throw up before school. Isabella was pale, with purple circles under her eyes. Her clothes, even after Mrs. Peterson had taken them in, were still loose. The girl was literally disappearing before everyone's eyes, but only the housekeeper seemed to truly see it. Michael was more absent than ever. His company was undergoing a complex merger with a European group, requiring meetings that stretched late into the night, last-minute trips, and video conferences with executives in different time zones. He left before 6 in the morning and returned after 10 at night. When he managed to have dinner at home, Clarissa monopolized the conversation with reports about the day, about school, about how Isabella was progressing under her firm guidance. Michael would listen distractedly, signing documents between bites, answering emails on his phone while his wife spoke. Isabella ate in silence, pushing food from one side of her plate to the other, eating just enough to avoid Clarissa's notice. She had learned the technique of hiding food in her napkin, chewing slowly to make it look like she was eating, and drinking lots of water to give the impression of being full. The last thing she wanted was to give Clarissa another reason to create a new rule, another punishment, disguised as an educational lesson. The nights were the most terrifying. Clarissa had established a routine of checking Isabella's room before she went to sleep. She claimed it was to make sure everything was organized, homework was done, and school supplies were ready for the next day. But Isabella knew it was pure control. The stepmother would open drawers, check the closet, run her finger along the shelves looking for dust, and read the notes in her school planner. And always, always she would leave a new note on the nightstand or inside her backpack. "You can do better. Your father works so hard for you, don't disappoint him. I want to see more effort tomorrow. Remember, polite girls don't complain, they say thank you." Mrs. Peterson tried to compensate in the only way she could. She prepared Isabella's favorite dishes, recorded cartoons for her to watch in secret, and invented excuses to get her out of the house on weekends when Michael was traveling and Clarissa had plans. She would take the girl for walks in Central Park, buy her ice cream, and sit on a bench letting her just be quiet, just exist without being criticized, watched, or judged. In those moments, Isabella would relax a little, breathe deeply, and sometimes even manage a smile. But the housekeeper knew it wasn't enough. The notebook with the notes was still hidden in her closet, weighing on her conscience. She needed to show it to Michael, but every attempt to talk to him was interrupted, postponed, or met with an impatient response. The businessman was completely consumed by work and blinded by the trust he placed in Clarissa. At school, the situation reached new heights of disguised cruelty. Clarissa, noticing that Isabella was becoming more and more withdrawn, intensified her control under the guise of helping the girl break out of her slump. She began to implement what she called responsibility exercises. One of these exercises took place at snack time. Clarissa started collecting Isabella's lunchbox as soon as she arrived in the classroom, locking it in a drawer, and only returning it if she deemed Isabella had behaved appropriately during the morning lessons. Any mistake, any distraction, any wrong answer was reason enough for the lunchbox to remain locked. Isabella would then sit in a corner of the classroom during recess, watching her classmates eat, play, and laugh, while she just observed, her stomach growling and her heart aching. When a classmate offered half of their snack, Clarissa would intervene. "No, thank you, but don't accept. Isabella needs to learn that things are earned through effort, not pity." The other teachers began to notice. Ms. Jackson from the cafeteria saw Isabella isolated recess after recess. The gym teacher realized the girl was weak, dizzy, and had no energy for activities. The librarian noticed that Isabella came to the library not to read but to hide, to have a place where no one was watching her for a few minutes. A few staff members tried to speak with the academic coordinator, but Clarissa was extremely well connected. She was close friends with the principal, admired by parents for her apparent dedication, and participated in every meeting and committee. When someone expressed concern about Isabella, Clarissa would explain with professional patience and firmness that the girl was going through a difficult family adjustment, that she had manipulative tendencies typical of children who have lost their mother, and that the methods she was using were recommended by renowned educational psychologists. And she always ended with, "Her father has complete faith in my work. He's a major supporter of the school." The mention of Michael and his generous donations to the institution worked as an effective silencer. No one wanted to risk creating a problem with such an important family. So, concerns were swallowed, uneasy glances were averted, and Isabella continued her lonely descent into an abyss that no one seemed willing to prevent. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, August 12th, that everything changed. Michael was in his office in Midtown, surrounded by documents, preparing for a crucial 3 o'clock meeting with the European investors. His assistant came in with a worried expression. "Mr. Anderson, I need to inform you that the 3 o'clock meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow. A technical issue with the connection on their end." Michael frowned, initially annoyed, but then he looked at the clock. It was 2:15. For the first time in months he had a free afternoon. He thought about using the time to get ahead on other projects, but something inside him, a restlessness that had been growing in recent weeks, made him decide otherwise. "I'm going to pick up my daughter from school today. Cancel my appointments until 6. The assistant looked surprised, but just nodded. Michael grabbed his jacket, went down to the garage, and drove himself to the Upper West Side. He didn't tell Clarissa. He didn't tell anyone. He just wanted to do something he hadn't done in far too long. Be present in his daughter's life unexpectedly, surprise her, maybe take her for ice cream, talk and reconnect with the little girl who seemed to be drifting further and further away. He arrived at Dalton Prep around 2:50, 15 minutes before the usual dismissal time. He parked a little way from the main entrance and went in through the reception, where he was greeted with smiles and deference from the administrative staff. He said he wanted to surprise his daughter and would like to wait for her near her classroom. The helpful receptionist walked him to the third-grade hallway, remarking on how rare it was to see such involved fathers and how happy Isabella would be. Michael walked down the empty hallway, which smelled of chalk and school supplies, listening to the distant murmur of children's voices. He approached the door of the classroom where Clarissa taught. There was a narrow window at the top of the door, the high kind that lets you see inside without being seen. He moved closer, curious to watch his daughter in class, imagining he would see her focused, drawing, or interacting with her friends. What he saw paralyzed him, froze the blood in his veins, and shattered the reality he had built around his family in a matter of seconds. The class was in that in-between moment before snack time when the kids get ready, chat, and relax. Isabella was sitting in the back row, alone, her head down. The other children were opening their lunchboxes, trading stickers and laughing. Clarissa, his wife, the dedicated teacher, the woman he trusted implicitly, was at the front of the room organizing papers. Then, with a casual movement, she walked over to Isabella's desk, picked up the girl's lunchbox, and placed it on her own desk, far out of the child's reach. Isabella looked up startled but said nothing. Clarissa smiled, that smile Michael knew so well, but which he now saw in a completely different light. "Isabella, you will be sitting out snack time today," Clarissa said, her voice loud enough for the whole class to hear. "You failed to answer the questions on yesterday's quiz correctly, even after all the extra time I gave you to study. You need to learn that laziness has consequences." The girl grew even paler, if that was possible. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. Michael saw his daughter's little hands tremble, saw her lower her head as if she wanted to disappear, saw the shame, fear, and humiliation etched on the small face that should have been smiling, playing, living. But the scene got worse. Clarissa didn't stop there. She pointed to a corner of the room near the supply closet, away from the other children. "Now you will stand there facing the wall until recess is over. This is a lesson for you to learn to appreciate the opportunities you have. If you were in Michael's shoes, seeing your daughter being humiliated like this, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments." Isabella stood up with the movements of someone in a nightmare, walked to the designated corner, and turned her back to her classmates. The other students fell silent, some scared, others relieved it wasn't them. No one dared to offer her their snack. No one spoke. The recess that should have been a time of joy turned into a funereal silence. Michael remained there behind the door, completely still. His brain refused to process what he was seeing. That couldn't be his wife. That couldn't be the woman he loved, the one he had chosen to be his daughter's stepmother, the one who swore to care for Isabella as if she were her own. But it was. It was her. And worse, this wasn't an isolated incident, a mistake, a one-time overreaction. The natural, almost routine way Clarissa carried out the punishment made it clear that this was a recurring, planned, systematic act. He took out his phone with trembling hands, turned on the camera and started recording. He needed proof. He needed to make sure no one could later say he had misunderstood, that he had overreacted, that he had taken things out of context. He recorded Isabella isolated in the corner, recorded the other students eating while his daughter went hungry, recorded Clarissa sitting at her desk, flipping through a design magazine with the expression of someone who had just successfully completed another educational task. The scene lasted for 20 interminable minutes. When the recess bell rang, the children went out to the playground. Isabella remained in the corner. Clarissa dismissed her with a lazy wave of her hand, only after the room was empty. The girl shuffled out, her shoulders slumped, a shadow of what an 8-year-old child should be. Michael didn't wait any longer. He strode into the room. Clarissa looked up, and her face went through a series of expressions he had never seen before. Surprise, fear, and then a forced smile as she tried to put her mask back on. "Michael, darling, what a surprise," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Where is my daughter?" "She went out for recess. I was just applying a pedagogical method that—" "Pedagogical method?" Michael's voice was low, controlled, but filled with a rage he had never felt in his life. Humiliating an 8-year-old child in front of her classmates, taking her food away, isolating her in a corner like an animal being punished. That's a pedagogical method. Clarissa straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her professional composure. "Michael, you don't understand education. Isabella needs boundaries. She was unmotivated. She didn't study for the quiz. She needs to learn that—" He held up, his phone with the recording. "I saw everything, I recorded everything, and now I'm going to find my daughter and get her out of here. And you will never come near her again." The color drained from Clarissa's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Michael turned his back and left the room, running down the hallways in search of Isabella. He found her on the playground, sitting alone on a bench under a tree, staring at the ground, her arms crossed over her empty stomach. "Isabella," he called, kneeling in front of her. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" "I came to get you. We're leaving." "But class isn't over. Ms. Hayes is going to be mad if—" "She won't be anything," he interrupted, scooping her into his arms as he hadn't done in years. "You are not going back to her classroom, ever again." Isabella didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt something different in her father's embrace, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Protection, safety, real presence. Michael carried his daughter in his arms, walking out of the school and ignoring the curious stares of staff and students. Clarissa tried to follow them, calling his name, but he didn't stop, didn't look back. He placed Isabella in the back seat of the car, carefully fastened her seatbelt, kissed her forehead, and said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I am so sorry." They went straight to the hospital. Michael called the family's private pediatrician and demanded he be available immediately. As they waited in the exam room, he held his daughter's hand, looked at her pale little face, those sunken eyes, that body too frail for her age, and felt a guilt so profound he could barely breathe. How had he been so blind? How had he outsourced the love, protection, and care of his own daughter to someone he trusted without question? How had he ignored the signs, Mrs. Peterson's attempts to warn him, the obvious physical symptoms, Isabella's changed behavior? The pediatrician examined the girl for nearly 2 hours. He ordered blood tests, x-rays, an ultrasound. The results started coming in throughout the afternoon, and each one was a stab to Michael's heart. Moderate malnutrition, erosive gastritis caused by chronic stress, anemia, sleep disturbances, signs of intense psychological distress. The doctor, a man in his 50s with 3 decades of experience, closed the folder with the results and looked at Michael seriously. "Mr. Anderson, these symptoms don't appear overnight. Isabella has been going through this for months. I have to ask, what is happening at home?" Michael told him everything: the teacher who became a stepmother, the rigid rules, the control, and finally, what he had seen that afternoon at the school. The doctor listened in silence and then said bluntly, "What you're describing isn't education. It's emotional abuse, and the effects on Isabella's body prove it. She needs urgent medical treatment, specialized psychological support, and most importantly, she needs to be immediately removed from the person causing this suffering." The words fell on Michael like stones. Abuse. He had allowed his daughter to be abused in her own home, in her own school, by someone he himself had put in that position of power. The responsibility was his. The guilt was his. Isabella's suffering was a direct consequence of his choices, his absence, his convenient blindness. That night, Michael didn't go back to the mansion. He took Isabella to a hotel and asked Mrs. Peterson to bring some of the girls' clothes and personal items. The housekeeper arrived carrying bags, tears streaming down her face. When she saw Michael holding Isabella, finally protecting her, she broke down sobbing. Her employer hugged her, apologized for not listening to her warnings, and thanked her for never giving up on the girl. Mrs. Peterson then went to her room, retrieved the hidden notebook with all of Clarissa's notes, and handed it to Michael. "You'd better see all of it. You need to know the extent of what was happening." He spent the night reading every note, every word, laden with manipulation, control, and cruelty, disguised as care. He felt nausea, fury, pain, but most of all, he felt shame. Shame for having failed so completely the person he loved most in the world. The next morning brought irreversible decisions. Michael woke up early in the hotel, watched Isabella still sleeping on the sofa bed, her face finally relaxed after a night without nightmares, and picked up the phone. His first call was to the best family law attorney in New York City. The second was to the district attorney's office. The third was to the principal of Dalton Prep. Each conversation was firm, objective, and filled with a determination he had never felt even in the toughest business negotiations. By 9 a.m., Michael was in the lawyer's office with the phone recording, the notebook of notes, the medical reports, and a list of witnesses that included Mrs. Peterson, Ms. Jackson from the cafeteria, and other school employees who, upon learning that someone was finally taking action, felt emboldened to speak up. The lawyer, an experienced man in his 60s who had seen it all, turned pale as he reviewed the material. "This is a classic case of ongoing emotional abuse," he stated gravely. "And the fact that it happened both at school and at home with extensive documentation makes the legal situation very clear. We'll file for an immediate protective order, sue for emotional distress, and demand her permanent removal from any contact with the child. We will also notify the State Board of Education so she can face professional consequences for her conduct." Michael nodded, signing every necessary document. For the first time in months, he felt he was doing something concrete to protect his daughter. It was no longer just about money or resources. It was about being present, making tough decisions, and facing the consequences of his own blindness. That same morning, court officers knocked on the door of the Upper East Side mansion. Clarissa received the protective order with trembling hands, reading that she was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Isabella, that she could not set foot on the Dalton Prep campus, and that she would face a lawsuit for emotional distress and psychological abuse. Along with the order came a subpoena to testify before the district attorney and the summons for a contested divorce with a claim for damages. The mask finally fell. Clarissa tried to call Michael dozens of times. She sent desperate messages, sometimes justifying herself, sometimes threatening, sometimes begging. He blocked all her contacts. There was nothing left to say. The woman he thought he knew had never existed. She was just a well-constructed facade, a character played with mastery. The scandal didn't take long to spread. Some parents from Dalton Prep, who had long suspected something but were afraid to speak up, began to come forward with similar stories. One mother said her son, a classmate of Isabella's, would come home saying Ms. Hayes was very mean to her stepdaughter, that she would take her snack away, that she would yell at her in private. Another father revealed that his daughter had seen Isabella crying in the bathroom but had been forbidden by the teacher to tell any adults. School employees, protected by the legal action, finally felt safe to testify. Ms. Jackson reported how she had seen Isabella go hungry repeatedly. The gym teacher described how the girl had fainted during one class, and Clarissa had downplayed it, saying she was being dramatic. The librarian told of finding Isabella hidden among the shelves, crying silently, terrified, of going back to class. The school's administration, pressured by the evidence and the public outcry, opened an internal investigation. It was discovered that other complaints about Clarissa's methods had been filed away over the years, ignored because of her influence and relationships within the institution. The principal, who had always unconditionally supported Clarissa, was placed on leave. The Board of Trustees issued a public statement apologizing to the families and promising a complete overhaul of their student protection protocols. The story made the local news. Teacher accused of emotionally abusing stepdaughter at elite NYC school. The backlash on social media was enormous. Parents across the country began sharing similar stories, questioning the line between strict education and psychological abuse, and demanding that schools implement more effective protective measures. Clarissa tried to defend herself publicly. She gave an interview to a blog, claiming she was being wronged, that she was a dedicated educator and the victim of a vindictive ex-husband. But the evidence was irrefutable. The recording, the handwritten notes, the medical reports, the testimonies from multiple people. Her defense quickly crumbled. The State Board of Education suspended her teaching license. The schools where she had previously taught launched their own internal investigations. Her name, once associated with pedagogical excellence, became synonymous with abuse disguised as care. The divorce was swift and one-sided. Michael had enough evidence to ensure Clarissa received nothing beyond what the law required, and that she would also be liable for damages. Within 2 months, the marriage was officially over. Clarissa moved out of New York, trying to rebuild her life away from the spotlight, but the stain on her reputation was permanent. While the legal and media storm raged, Michael focused all his energy on Isabella. He sold shares in his company, delegated responsibilities, cancelled trips and declined meetings. For the first time in his adult life, work was not the priority. His daughter was. He enrolled her in a new school, small, nurturing, and specializing in children who had experienced trauma. He hired a multidisciplinary team, a child psychologist, a nutritionist, a pediatrician, and an occupational therapist. Each professional worked together to help Isabella recover. The recovery was slow and painful. Isabella had frequent nightmares, woke up screaming, and refused food for fear of being punished. It took weeks for her to understand that she wouldn't be punished for making a mistake, for crying, for being hungry, for being a child. The psychologist used trauma-informed techniques, helping the girl verbalize fears that were once just physical sensations. The nutritionist created a gentle eating plan, without pressure, respecting Isabella's pace as she rebuilt a healthy relationship with food. Michael was present every step of the way. He took his daughter to her appointments, participated in family therapy sessions, learned nonviolent communication techniques, studied childhood trauma, and read books on present parenting. He discovered that being a father wasn't about providing resources, but about being emotionally available, validating feelings, and creating a safe environment where a child could be vulnerable without fear. Mrs. Peterson continued to be the emotional anchor of the home, but now she wasn't alone. Michael cooked breakfast on weekends, took Isabella for ice cream after therapy, watched movies cuddled up with her on the sofa, and read her stories before bed. Small gestures that were routine for many families were, for them, the rebuilding of a bond, piece by piece. The months turned into seasons. The icy winter of August gave way to the blooming spring of September. Isabella started to smile again, not the forced, faded smile from before, but a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She started drawing again, timidly at first, then with more confidence. Her drawings changed. They used to be empty landscapes or her mother's face. Now they included herself, her father, Mrs. Peterson, her new friends from school, and the dog Michael adopted to keep her company. The gastritis was treated with medication and a proper diet. Her weight gradually returned under the nutritionist's careful guidance. Her sleep improved as her sense of security grew stronger. Isabella still had bad days, moments when the memory of the trauma resurfaced, but now she had present adults to comfort her, to remind her that she was safe, that no one would hurt her again. At her new school, she flourished. The teachers were trained in trauma-informed education. They knew how to recognize signs of distress and worked with patience and kindness. Isabella made real friends, participated in art workshops, and won an award in a citywide drawing contest. The artistic talent that Clarissa had used as a tool for manipulation became a genuine source of joy and expression. 2 years after the discovery, Michael looked at his 10-year-old daughter and saw a completely different child from the girl who had cowered in the corner of a classroom. Isabella laughed loudly, ran in the park, had opinions, expressed her feelings, ate with an appetite, and slept peacefully. The healing process hadn't been linear. It had setbacks and difficulties, but the transformation was undeniable. The businessman had also transformed. He reduced his workload by 40%, delegated operations, and invested in competent executives to take over roles he once centralized. He discovered that the company didn't fall apart without his constant presence, and in fact ran better with distributed management. He had more time for Isabella, for himself, for a life. Beyond numbers and spreadsheets, he started attending support groups for parents who had been through similar situations. He realized he wasn't alone. There were hundreds of families where emotional abuse occurred, disguised as education, discipline, or tough love. He talked with parents who had also been blind, who had also trusted the wrong person, who also carried guilt. These meetings helped him process his own journey, forgive himself, and turn pain into purpose. It was at one of these meetings that he met other parents interested in creating something bigger, a movement, a project, a way to prevent other children from going through what Isabella had. Together, they founded an NGO called Watchful Eyes, focused on educating parents, teachers, and communities about the signs of child emotional abuse, the difference between healthy discipline and destructive control, and the importance of believing children when they even indirectly ask for help. The NGO offered free workshops in schools, training for educators, support groups for families, and educational materials on conscious parenting and child protection. Michael funded the initial setup, but insisted it be a collective effort, not a solo act. Mrs. Peterson participated by sharing her experience as an employee who tried to sound the alarm but wasn't heard. Isabella, when she felt ready at age 12, recorded an anonymous audio testimonial about her story, which was used in the workshops to show the child's perspective. The impact was significant. Dozens of schools revised their student protection protocols. Hundreds of parents learned to recognize signs of emotional distress in their children. Several cases of abuse were identified and stopped, thanks to the awareness raised. The NGO grew, opened chapters in other cities, and partnered with Child Protective Services and local departments of education. Isabella grew up. At 15, she was a confident, engaged and talented teenager. She continued with therapy, not because she was sick, but because she had learned to value mental health as part of self-care. She attended an arts high school, wanted to major in psychology in college, and dreamed of working with children who had experienced trauma similar to her own. At 18, she applied to college and got a full scholarship to the psychology program at NYU. At her celebration party, modest but full of affection in the Upper East Side mansion that was now a real home, Isabella gave a speech that left everyone in tears. "I am not defined by what happened to me when I was 8. I am defined by how I overcame it, by the people who supported me, by my father who woke up in time to save me, by Mrs. Peterson who never gave up on me, and by the professionals who helped me rebuild myself. Today I know I can use this experience to help other children find their voices, be believed, and feel safe. That's what I want to do with my life." Michael hugged her, emotional, and realized that this moment was proof that redemption was possible. That even after failing so terribly, it was possible to correct course, take responsibility, and work tirelessly for healing. It didn't erase the past, it didn't undo the pain Isabella had felt, but it transformed suffering into purpose. Years later, with Isabella graduated and working at a clinic specializing in childhood trauma, Michael was invited to give a keynote speech at an education conference. He took the stage, a man in his early 50s who had learned life's hardest lessons and told his story without a filter. He spoke of the success-obsessed businessman who neglected his own daughter, of the wife who seemed perfect but was a predator, of the signs he ignored, of the housekeeper who tried to warn him and wasn't heard, of the devastating moment he finally saw the truth, of the long road to recovery, of the transformation that occurred when he finally chose to be the father his daughter needed. His final message resonated with the audience. We cannot outsource love. We cannot believe that money, structure, or competent professionals can replace presence. Children need adults who are attentive, available, and willing to listen even when it's uncomfortable. They need to know they will be believed when they ask for help, even if they do so silently. And we, as adults, need the humility to admit when we are wrong and the courage to fix it. The audience rose to a standing ovation. Many were crying. After the speech, dozens of parents approached him, sharing their own stories, asking for guidance and thanking him for having the courage to expose his failings publicly. Isabella was at the back of the auditorium, watching her father. He saw her, smiled, and she smiled back. A smile of complicity, of forgiveness, of mutual gratitude. They had walked a painful path, together, but they had reached the other side. Not whole as they were before, because trauma leaves scars, but stronger, more conscious, more human. That little girl who was once isolated in a classroom corner, hungry and ashamed, was now a professional helping other children find their voice. That father who was once blinded by ambition and misplaced trust was now a tireless advocate for child protection and present parenting. And Mrs. Peterson, now retired but always present, watched it all from the front row, her hands clasped and her heart at peace, knowing that her persistence, her refusal to Give up on that little girl had made all the difference. That even when it seemed no one was listening, her words had planted seeds that sprouted at just the right moment. The story of Michael and Isabella wasn't about a perfect happy ending where everything was magically resolved. It was about the raw reality of families who face challenges, who make mistakes, who have to rebuild fragmented bonds. It was about the fact that abuse can happen in the most unlikely places, perpetrated by the people we least suspect, and that the only way to fight it is through loving vigilance, attentive listening, and the courage to act even when it's inconvenient. It was about a father who learned painfully that being present isn't about the quantity of time, but the quality of presence. About a girl who discovered that her voice matters, that her feelings are valid, and that she deserves to be cared for with kindness. About a housekeeper who taught that insisting on care, even when it goes unrecognized, can save lives. And about a society that urgently needs to stop confusing control with love, rigidity with education, and abuse with discipline. Years had passed since that August afternoon when a father walked into a classroom a few minutes early and saw what was happening to his daughter. But that moment changed trajectories, saved a life, awakened consciences, and created movements. It proved that it's never too late to see, to act, to start over. And that the greatest miracle isn't that everything is perfect, but that even after suffering, it is still possible to rebuild love, trust, and hope. Dear listeners, we hope Michael and Isabella's story touched your heart. If you were moved, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.